Hi everyone, Phil here with Skweeel episode 3, documenting my Masters by Research project. I'm once again at SAE Byron Bay's beautiful SSL 9000K studios, and I cannot thank them enough for this awesome opportunity. In the previous episode, I lied a bit when I said that we'd be exploring now advanced signal flow involving several channels. There's footage which I shot last time, such as using the aux sends or using the insert return, which I would like to show you now. And before I move on to using 2 channels or more, I would like to wrap things up with the possibilities of using just 1 channel by exploring what the mic pre can do. So far we've been using the channel's line input as the return of the loop, and I'm suspecting that due to its different circuitry, the mic pre will give us a range of new sound flavors, or at least I hope so. Let's see if that's true. Because I do want you to try this at home, do remember to protect your hearing. The way I'm doing it here is by always having the quad compressor inserted onto the master output, so it never gets super loud in the speakers. Another way to create a feedback loop inside a channel is to use one of the aux sends on that channel and connect that aux send output to the input of the same channel. So here we have a total of 8, 1 stereo one, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mono ones. I'm using aux send 1, which I'm going to turn on. And then as I reach unity gain, which is almost at the maximum position of the pot, then immediately we get the now familiar high frequency squeal at first, and then when more gain is applied, the more low frequency flatula. So it doesn't seem to be a lot of change using that particular path as opposed to using the insert send as an output. Each particular aux send can be switched in pairs, either pre or post faders. So right now the aux send is post fader. You don't see it now because the fader's down there, but if I change the fader's position, then I can cancel the loop. But if I activate the aux 1, 2 as a pre, then I can set a feedback loop that is not influenced by the position of the fader. So right now what I'm doing down here is I'm moving the fader up and down, and therefore all I'm doing with the fader is controlling the final output level of the feedback loop. The feedback loop is established only by the aux send level and not by the combination of aux send level plus, down there, fader level, which I'm wheeling. But again, timbre-wise, nothing new here so far. What I just had now was the auxiliary send 1 going into the channel's line input. I'm wondering what will happen if we actually shorten the path back into the channel by using instead the channel insert return, which I've just connected now to that aux send. What we first need to do is activate the insert return signal. So that's done in that section there where previously we could choose whether the insert point was pre or post EQ. So pressing the in button tells the channel path that its input is now the insert return patch point and no longer up there, the mic line input section. So now if I turn on, again, it's aux 1 I've connected. If I turn that on and if I reach a point close to unity gain, I get the same predictable results as before, and none of the interesting other types of sounds that we've discovered by manipulating either the compressor, the dynamic section or the EQ section. And I'm not very surprised by that. The amount of circuitry that is activated when the EQ section is inserted into the feedback loop, or when up there the dynamic section is inserted, is far more complex than the little amount of circuitry that is just basically controlling gain from an aux send. And you'd expect the insert return section to have almost little electronics apart an input buffer. So yes, I'm not surprised that we're getting the usual squeal when we're close to the unity gain, to the onset of the feedback loop, and then the low frequency flatula, as I've always called it from the very beginning, when we apply more gain. So nothing very exciting there. So now, instead of using the line input, let's see what happens when we go back to the channel's mic input. With the amount of gain that a microphone input is designed to apply, it's no surprise that the moment we switch to it, even at its lowest setting, we immediately get a feedback loop happening. What is surprising, though, is that even though we are getting a loop, we cannot hear it. There is a signal registering on the meter. There's a signal registering on the main outputs. However, this is not a signal that we can hear. Also, it doesn't register on the Pro Tools converters. What you're seeing here is the sound of my lapel mic, and the console output is on inputs 1 and 2, and there's absolutely nothing registering after the converters on our interface. So I suspect that what we're witnessing is a very high frequency feedback loop, which is not making it past the Nyquist frequency set by our 48K sample rate for this video. So to make sure that it's indeed what I think, a very high frequency signal, I'm creating a 192K sample rate session. And indeed, the moment I activate the feedback loop, I've got signal happening on the inputs of that stereo track. Having recorded that signal in my high sample rate session, I'm able to import it into a spectrum analyzer. And on the spectrogram, indeed, we can see that there's a lot of energy happening at 55 kilohertz and also a fair amount at 80K. So this is definitely why it wasn't registering at all on the meters of my 48K sample rate session for the soundtrack of this video. There are two ways that apparently allow me to bring this super high frequency signal back down into the audible range. The first thing I noticed is that by using the phase invert, the polarity switch, I'm able to, I don't know why it does that, but it's bringing the feedback loop back into the audible range. But notice how the position of the mic gain pot has almost no influence on the actual signal. And so the tone seems to be completely set in stone with no possibility to change it. So not that interesting. I thought as well maybe using the pad switch would actually bring the signal down enough that it's below the threshold where the feedback loop happens. And indeed, we're now into a behavior which is quite similar to what we had with the line input. And I was expecting a different kind of tone, which doesn't really happen when you're close to the threshold, to that tipping point. But what does happen, interestingly, is once we go beyond the tipping point, then we get these very interesting cyclic tearing sounds, like fabric being torn. So it's going to be very difficult to use this type of sound in a musical way, but nonetheless we can add that to our catalog of sounds that we get by creating feedback loops. It seems that if we apply even more gain, then this cycle of tearing and then the signal interrupting doesn't happen anymore. Why it does that cycle, I think, is beyond the scope of my understanding of the electronics in the signal path that actually produce that very long cycle and change of sound. Interesting pattern. Probably hard to use. As part of the mic preamp signal path, we also have a high impedance switch, which allows the engineer to modify the input impedance to accommodate for different types of microphones. But this doesn't seem like it has an influence on the signal. If I use the different combinations of polarity inverts, that switch has very, very little impact. Changing the impedance of the mic pre-input. Or if I use the input pad, again changing the input impedance, doesn't seem to have any major influence. It's not introducing any new sonic flavors. Adding the compressor into the equation, if we have this kind of cyclic siren tearing sound happening, whether we insert the dynamic section before or after the feedback loop, we're getting the behavior that we expect. It's not introducing any additional flavors of sound to the ones that we've stumbled upon on episode 2. Same thing with the equalizer. It's not really introducing anything new. If that's the raw sound that we have, then the behavior of the EQ added into the circuitry is predictable. This concludes episode 3. In the next episode, we will delve into more complex signal flow involving, for instance, the monitor path, which we haven't explored yet. Until then, as they say in my home country, protégez-vous les cages à miel. Make some great sounds. Ciao.